Bonjour and welcome to the Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast. Join us each week for discussions on topics including culture and language, career exploration, RLNC student spotlights, student projects, and other RLNC services. This week we have part 1 of interviews conducted by RLNC students for Professor Tom Hokinson's Fall 2021 Cultural Geography class. Red Lake Nation College would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support in the creations of these podcasts. Miigwech.
Hello, I'm Dr. Thomas Hokinson. I teach social and behavioral science classes here at the Red Lake Nation College. Today you'll be listening to a couple interviews of students I had in my cultural geography class. The goal of this project was to interview either parents, elders, or other members of the community in order to see what it was like in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s. I hope you enjoy the interview.
All right, this is Mitchell Johnson Jr. interviewing Mitchell Johnson Sr. on November 20th, 2021. All right, so start out with just a little background about yourself, Dad. You were born July 4th, 1950, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were, pretty much from birth, you were raised by your maternal grandparents, correct?
Right.
All right. And then what were their names?
Joseph and Susan Johnson.
All right. So for my first question, what was it like for you growing up in Red Lake in the 1950s and in the 60s?
What was it like?
Yeah. What was it like growing up in Red Lake and growing up in Little Rock?
It was 50s. Oh, man. We grew up in Little Rock, and we didn't have a whole lot. At that time, there was no electricity, no running water, stuff like that. We had a wood stove, burned, we had to gather firewood and stuff, and it was, I want to say, well, we didn't have a whole lot, but yet we still, we did stuff. We had a garden, and of course we fished, and trap. My grandpa's a trapper, but yeah, it was still kind of a rough life, but hard life. But yeah, it was still good memories and stuff. At that time, going back to the 50s, Highway 1, which runs through the Red Lake through out west, that was a gravel road. It was all gravel. Well, even 89 back then, in the 50s, up until, I want to say, early 60s, then the roads were paved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you can remember when there were still gravel roads, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. In the 60s, then there was a lot of changes with people were getting better housing. Well, by the late 50s, we had electricity then, but then of course running water and stuff like that. Yeah, things were changing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, when you were growing up in Red Lake, you mentioned earlier that your grandpa was a trapper and that you guys fished a lot, but how important was the lake itself for you and your grandparents, and what was the relationship like between the community and the lake?
Well, the thing about, back then, like in the 50s, well, even into the 60s, into the 70s, commercial fishing was a big thing, so that the lake was important to people for it was a source of income. It was like one of the major jobs for people on a reservation. And then not only that, it was, of course, a food source. People would get fish for their own households and stuff like that.
A way to survive, yeah.
Yeah. So, it was important in that way. So commercial fishing, food for your own house, Then the lake itself, I mean, for kids, was a place where we'd go swimming and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a recreational thing there.
Where would you guys swim?
In Little Rock, they would swim right by our landing, our place there, right down from the cliff there.
Sure.
And then over by Little Rock Creek, a lot of us, especially the Bolio kids, we would go swim over there in the summer and would hang out there. And it was a kind of a nice swimming area right by the inlet of the Little Rock Creek.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, not only for just me and my grandpa and grandma, as far as commercial fishing, everybody did that. So
that was something everyone did, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty much, yeah. So it was real important.
You mentioned before too that in Little Rock that you guys had a garden, but you told me at one point that there was gardens that you can remember, gardens all along the cliffs in Little Rock, right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't remember gardens, but I was told that there were gardens, and then I could see all along the lake there in Little Rock. There were fields that had returned to fields instead, like meadows, really.
Sure.
But those were all gardens all along the lake.
Wow.
And people had their garden because people lived by the lake, up until I don't know when that Highway 1 was developed and made. I want to say probably in the 30s, maybe around there.
Sure.
But everybody lived down by the lake. And then where our sugar bush is, and you remember the road that runs through the sugar bush?
Yep.
That was the main road.
Okay,
from to Red Lake, back out west to the outlet area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Much closer to the lake itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody lived along the lake.
Okay.
Back then.
All right. Well, thanks for sitting down with me, Dad. No, it's a quick couple of questions, but thanks for letting me interview you about Red Lake. I was just going to ask you, though, for the last question. I was wondering, when you think back on it, what's one of your favorite memories of growing up in Little Rock, or what's a memory that really stands out and sticks out for you?
Well, quite a few things. But, if we have a little time here, just to go back a little bit about the gardens where we lived. Mm-hmm. We had a garden there, our old I guess, home site. There was a garden, there was a sugar bush, and we're right by the lake. So everything was right there. It was like...
everything you needed was right there.
Almost like a perfect place. Paradise, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things about, if we talk about the lake and relate to the lake, my grandpa at one time was telling me a story of when he was a boy, his grandma told him when she was a little girl. So this was like in I want to say early 1800s. Mm-hmm. We're standing by the cliff there overlooking the lake, and he's telling me that when she was a little girl, they would launch from there in canoes and go out west to hunt buffalo. So they'd canoe from there to the outlet.
From Little Rock all the way
to the outlet. From Little
Rock
to the outlet river, to Red Lake River, and go down the river to hunt buffalo. So, yeah, I thought that was...
wow.
That was pretty amazing. Another thing about relating to the lake, another story my grandpa told me was he can remember it was like this time of the year in November when it's starting to get cold and there's ice is starting to form on the lake, that he told me that the old ladies would set nets on the edge of the ice.
Wow.
The old ladies.
As it was starting to freeze.
Yeah,
huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
There was this elder named Louisa Leonzel. She was telling me of a story of when she was a young girl, so this would have been in the early 1900s, and she was walking by our area there, our place where our people lived there, and she said there was these two ladies that were drying fish. They were hanging fish in these racks and stuff, and they were drying or smoking fish. And she said it must have been your grandparent, your grandma's.
Wow.
She was telling me, yeah. So
smoking fish right on the cliff there, huh?
right, yeah.
Wow.
Right on the edge there. So yeah, everybody lived along the lake.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those are some of the memories I had. You know, one of the things about in the treaty, one of the Red Lake treaties, when the chiefs were trying to hang on to the lake, well, we lost half of that upper Red Lake,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I can remember reading in the treaty, you can look at it, it said that they wanted to keep the lake because the lake was important for them, because that's where they were getting their food, and they called it a storehouse. And they said, we want to keep this lake for our children and our children's children.
Mm-hmm.
And they refer to it as a storehouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Interesting that they viewed it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the memories that I had, though, growing up, I had mentioned trapping, where we used to go down the river, the Red Lake River, and we'd live down there, my grandpa and I was just a little guy. Probably, I want to say I was probably 4 years old, 5 years old. But I can remember early in the morning going with my grandpa, getting in our rice boat.
Mm-hmm.
Rice boat that was also used as our trapping boat as well. We'd go pick up muskrats. You trap muskrats. And I remember early in the morning, the steam was coming off the river. And it was like just at daybreak.
Yeah.
You know, we're going out to get
Going into the mist, huh?
Yeah, going to pick up, check our traps and get muskrats.
Wow.
Along that line too, when I was just a little guy, it's probably, I don't know, about 7, 8 years old. I had me a little trap line, or a snare line. I'd go and snare rabbits behind our house there, right between our house now where it was
Sure.
and the lake. I'd go and get my rabbits and stuff. Another little story was people used to have horses, work horses back then, and there was two families that had horses, Halletts and Maxwells. And every so often those horses would get loose, and they'd come into people's yards and stuff. And one morning my grandpa woke me up, and I was probably 3, 4 years old.
Sure.
And he woke me up, and he put me on this horse, this big work horse. It was a big white horse. And he took me around the house a few times. And I remember I was really,
something else,
that was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just a little guy. Man, I remember that. He would make me bows and arrows, bows out of oak, white oak, and arrows. And the arrows had a round, he had carved these arrows, and they'd have a round ball on the end of them. And
He would carve those, huh?
he carved those, yeah.
Wow.
And really cool oak bows. And then, of course, playing around the neighborhood, all growing up at that time, 50s and 60s, I was the only one, just me, my grandpa, and I, and my grandma. Mm-hmm. And but I would go out and play in the neighborhood. I'd go all over that Little Rock area. The Sumner boys, over at my cousins, the Johnsons, Billy Green,
Mm-hmm.
the Bolios, all the Bolios, Harlan, all those guys. I would play with those kids all day long and stuff.
Yeah, everybody in the neighborhood. Huh?
Yeah, people would invite me into their homes, and whatever food they had, they would share with me and stuff like that. Didn't have much, but still invite me in. Yeah,
a pretty tight community, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. You didn't really have to worry either back then, about any kind of harm or anybody getting beaten on you or anything like that.
Sure.
Yeah, let's close here with it's almost Thanksgiving, and one of the memories that I have, to me is a cool thing. Just a young guy again, and it was Thanksgiving, and we didn't have a turkey for Thanksgiving. It was getting close. It was just a few days before Thanksgiving. and there was these. All of a sudden, we could hear these geese coming, mm-hmm. And my grandpa grabbed his gun, and the geese were getting closer and closer, and all of a sudden he went out there, and they were coming right over the house, right over our yard, and he shot one. He shot it right out of the air, and the goose fell right in the yard. I mean, I was like, wow, I was pretty impressed.
That's impressive. Holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. But
so then you guys got your turkey for the year.
We had our turkey, our goose. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, those were good memories.
All right. Well, like I said, thanks again, Dad, for sitting down with me and chatting with me about growing up in Red Lake.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anin buju awani ko indigenous mekanak ndunda misquagamiwis gai gunning ndunjube. Today is Friday, November 19th, 2021, and I'm sitting here with my mother, Coral Taylor.
Anin.
Yeah, the topic was fun adventures that you had growing up, and specifically ones related to Red Lake. I know you've told me in the past about swimming in Fuller's Lake. I'm not sure where the rumor came from, but I was told that it was bottomless.
Yeah, I remember going to 4th of July powwow every summer, and it was a tradition, and it was always exciting to go up north. Being that I'm first generation urban native, born and mostly raised in Minneapolis. But one memory I have is, aside from the powwow every summer, is swimming in the lake behind my aunt's house, and that's Fuller's Lake. I think I was 8 years old, and I remember drowning, and I was tangled in some seaweed, and I could see the sky, but I could see where I wanted to get to, but I couldn't get to above the water. And then my brother jumped in and tried to save me, and then I guess I start pulling him under, and but then there was someone that came out of nowhere, and he was like a 15-year-old boy, and he saved me and my brother from drowning. And then before we could thank him, he had vanished, and that was always...
Like a significant memory?
Yeah, it always stuck with me, and I usually get anxiety when I'm by water now, because I can just feel like how much life is in the water, so to speak. But I never did get to thank that person that saved us, and when I looked, he had vanished, and that was just always a memory that stuck with me, and that's why I honor and respect water, but I won't go swimming in it.
Yeah. I get anxiety in water where I can't see the bottom. I need to see the bottom, otherwise I kind of start panicking.
Yeah. I feel a connection now, I guess, with water from prior to the drowning, like when I didn't think much of it. But I feel a greater connection now ever since the potential drowning that occurred when I was 8. But that's one of the most significant memories that I have
of like being in Red Lake, or
Yeah.
this was at Fuller's Lake by Appleby Road.
Yeah, that's kind of a house where I grew up going to every summer or winter, or anytime I went up north, it was always the place where we went. So it's like kind of like a home away from home.
Yeah, growing up, we moved around a lot, like Arizona, New York, Kansas. So there was always a lot of houses, but my auntie Marilyn's house, that's always been a house that's always been there. Like, that house is a home.
That counts as a home from day one.
But thank you for sharing.
No problem.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to join us next week as we continue to hear from RLC students and their podcast projects they created in Professor Hokinson's Cultural Geography class. Miigwech, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Miigwech to the following for their efforts in the creation of this Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast episode. Opening and closing music by Director of Equity, Cultural Education, and Archives, Floyd Buck-Jourdain. Opening introduction and closing preview by Recruitment and Retention Coordinator and Director of Social Media, Michael Whitecloud. Our student introduction by RLNC instructor, Dr. Thomas Hokinson. Our student hosts this episode, Mitchell Johnson and Alyssa Webster. Our guest speakers this episode, Mitchell Johnson Sr. and Coral Taylor. Production by Innovation Center Coordinator, Brandon Spears. And the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support. Miigwech.